Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. After nearly 2 years offline, oil could once again flow through the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline, bringing Northern Iraqi crude into Turkey. Turkish Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar said Ankara wants the pipeline running at full capacity to help stabilize global markets. Meanwhile, Washington is pressuring Iraq to allow the Kurdish Regional Government to export oil through Turkey as the U.S. ramps up efforts against Iran. Disputes between oil companies and Iraq's oil ministry remain unresolved, but officials say exports could resume soon. The move is expected to strengthen ties between Ankara and Baghdad following President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan's landmark visit to Iraq last year. Turkey praised Iraq's efforts against the PKK terror group, which Baghdad has officially declared illegal. The two nations are also advancing the Development Road Project, a $17 billion mega infrastructure plan linking Asia to Europe. The network will include transport and energy corridors stretching from the Gulf through Iraq and Turkey into Europe. For more, joining me now from Boston, Massachusetts is Hamza Haddad, a visiting fellow at the European Council for Foreign Relations. From London, Afzal Ashraf, a visiting fellow at Loughborough University, and from Ankara, Betül Doğan Akkaş, an assistant professor at Ankara University. Thanks for joining me now with everything happening in Ukraine, Gaza, Syria. Iraq is getting overlooked, but a lot's happening in Iraq. I want to begin talking with the pipeline that would be running from Iraq to Turkey. Recently, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio talked about wanting to see that pipeline open. Hamza, why do the Americans want to see that pipeline reopened?
Well, there are two reasons that the Americans would like to see this pipeline reopened. The first would be is that at the moment there's a lot of oil smuggling from the Kurdistan region of Iraq to Iran. So by resuming this pipeline, ideally you would get less oil smuggling to Iran. That's the first. The second is financial interest. There's a lot of oil companies that operate in the Kurdistan region of Iraq that have been offline for over 2 years now, and they'd like to see that restarted.
Mm-hmm. Afzal, who's the big winners and the losers of this pipeline being opened up, aside from the Americans? For example, what are the Iranians thinking about? Would this impact Syria, Russia, Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think Hamza's given you two reasons, but there are others. The primary one, as far as I'm concerned, is the geopolitical one. And it goes to your question, because geopolitically, this pipeline doesn't just affect the United States, Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, as you mentioned, but it also includes Russia and China. And one of the reasons why the US is keen to establish this pipeline is that it wants to reduce the possibility of China having an interest in that region. It wants to ensure that Iran doesn't benefit from the oil supplies in the region. And so this is a very complex relationship. Who are the winners and losers? I don't think Saudi Arabia and many of the other Gulf countries will lose very much. They're already producing a huge amount of oil, but there will obviously be a negative impact on the major players that I've talked about. Iran obviously is going to be sidelined by this if this goes ahead, or potentially it would be. The Chinese, if they have any designs in the region, of course they do, but the extent of them I can't really comment on. They obviously would lose to some degree, not to a major degree, I don't think. So there are very complex issues here, and indeed also the people who will be doing construction work, associated services, mostly locals, primarily in the Kurdish regions of Iraq, and these people obviously will benefit. It'll be a positive impact on the Iraqi economy. The problem here on the downside is that by aligning itself with the United States, Iraq makes itself vulnerable. And this is something that I think in all of our answers to your further questions, we need to bear in mind. We live in what I would describe as a post-analytical framework world. The sort of analysis we would do to give you forecasts or answers to your questions no longer really apply with the Trump regime in power. He's disrupted all of those areas of certainty analysis. And so one thing that any country would have to consider is how long will a relationship with the United States last, how positive it would be, and what potential it has for a negative coercive effect.
So the only certainty is uncertainty. Betul, let's move on to you. Turkey. The Turks seem very keen on having this pipeline reopened. The Turkish energy minister said he wants to see it at full capacity. So what does this mean for the Turks?
The pipeline was closed almost for 2 years. It's right now it's 2 years, and which means Turkey is not able to use its strategic connection, logistic connection between Iraq and Europe, and all the investment Turkey has done so far on the pipeline politically and economically has been not used. So what does he mean actually? Connecting Turkish logistic strategy to Iraq and Europe. And with this way, Turkey can relocate its relations with Iraq because the problems over the pipeline, of course, has an angle regarding the technical issues or Turkish connection to it, but it's more about the domestic politics in Iraq between KRG and central government in Baghdad, and they have legislation problems. They have some judicial problems in terms of constitutional rights of KRG and Baghdad government. They have some technical issues regarding the quota of oil production, how much KRG is going to demand per barrel, etc. So there's a lot of negotiations going on since decades between the Kurdistan region and Baghdad. So Turkish role in it actually, or the take of Turkey, is a clear benefit from this negotiations and oil production as a logistic connection between Iraq, including Kurdistan, and Europe. And Turkey has been working on this file for a very long time, since the opening of the pipeline in 1970s. And in the current stage, as Turkey is looking forward to re-establishing its connection through the pipeline between Iraq and Europe, I believe the central take is securing the pipeline and using the advantage of renegotiations between Kurdistan region and Baghdad government, and using the advantage of political atmosphere. Now we are moving off on a new security era in the Kurdish issue in the Turkish border. So all this is coming together and kind of motivates Turkey to refocus on it.
Hamza, Betul touched on the security of the pipeline, and I think security is obviously vital for any pipeline that's doing business in this region. When you're looking at the security situation, whether it's ISIS, whether it's Iran-backed groups, whether it's the PKK, can the pipeline be secured, and how much of a concern should that be?
I mean, the pipeline was operating during times of war with ISIS. So it's not so much a security aspect that's stopping it. Like my colleague said, a lot of it has to do is domestic politics between the federal government in Baghdad and the Kurdistan Regional Government. Now, does an improved security sector make things easier moving forward? Definitely. It allows officials to focus less on security vacuum and focus more on ironing out the details of how to resume oil.
Mm-hmm. But Hamza, there was a greater U.S. presence back then. It seems like the U.S. presence obviously winding down. It could further wind down. So is that going to require more local security from Iraq, the KRG, or the Turks? Or do you feel that the security situation is bearable with the current situation on the ground?
The security situation has improved greatly since the defeat of ISIS territorially in December 2017. The winding down of foreign troops in Iraq is a sign that things are improving. And let's be honest, ideally, no country wants foreign troops on their territory. So if the Iraqis and the Turks can take care of this together on their border, then that's the ideal situation. However, we did have developments in Syria at the end of last year that has put a question on, where is the region going? How sustainable is the new regime in Syria? And how secure is the border between Iraq and Syria? So definitely security plays an important aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Afzal, Hamza touched on the situation in Syria, obviously over the last 3-4 months, what we can call a paradigm shift in Syria. Iran basically being removed, change in administration, Ahmed al-Shara now in power in Damascus. How do you view the developments in Syria impacting Iraq, impacting the KRG, impacting Turkey, vis-a-vis the pipeline or any big project like the development road?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And the issue of security for pipelines and the like, as Hamza has described, is in conventional terms not a major issue, but things have changed. And we mustn't forget that in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the gas pipeline under sea has been deliberately blown up by allegedly state actors or state-supported actors. So the targeting of energy infrastructure and indeed logistical infrastructure is now part of modern warfare, and it must be taken into account. Things such as rapid repair capabilities, because these things can be targeted and will be targeted as they have been targeted. The security arrangements can prevent to a certain degree, but restoration of supplies is a matter that must be taken into account when designing these systems. Coming to your main question in terms of Syria, all of those issues apply because, of course, there's pipelines from Syria and roads links as well. But there are other significant issues, particularly on border instability since the fall of Assad. There is still the potential for ISIS type of resurgence, the uncertainty of the Al-Hol refugee camp with over 40,000 people, including 20,000 Iraqis in that camp. There is very likely to be a movement across the border in both directions of people of dubious character. And then we've got the possibility of Iranian-backed militias, many of whom feel aggrieved by the recent actions, the recent change of power. And so there's a very important balancing act that has to take place, particularly in terms of Iraq, because it has a significant population that sees value in both sides, supporting the sort of Assad regime, the Iranian, so-called Iranian influence there, as well as those who are grievously opposed to it. And the relationships with the United States is a key one. The important thing, I think, here is that the new regime is a very questionable one. We know that al-Shara has a very questionable background, having been associated with the leadership of extremists, Al-Qaeda-linked extremists, and some people say even ISIS extremists, despite his rhetoric to the opposite. The other thing we must realize that Syria as a state has been dismantled in security terms. Even in the last few days, Israel continues to take out any remaining security infrastructure from the old regime, which renders the new regime incapable of defending itself. In the last 48 hours, there have been attacks, allegedly, from the supporters of the old regime, the Assad regime, against the new regime. And this may well be the beginning of a destabilizing situation in Syria.
Definitely some concerning developments in Latakia's Syria that we're going to have to be closely following. Betul, I want to ask you about another important development. the founder of the PKK terror group, Abdullah Öcalan, releasing a message saying, disarm, disband to the group. Now, this is, I think, significant because the group has its headquarters in northern Iraq in Kandil. Right across the border in Syria, you have the SDF, which is has a significant YPG presence inside of it, which is the Syrian arm of the group. So when you see this type of call, and the call was welcomed in Turkey, it seems to be welcomed in northern Iraq as well. How is this going to impact at least the security dynamic and also the relationship between the many other actors and each other?
In the last 2-3 years, although Turkish army has been engaged in military operations physically in the Iraqi border in the north of Iraq, the Kurdistan region, there wasn't any political tension between Ankara and Erbil because two sides of this political spectrum, they agreed on the fact that they have to secure certain political tensions to move on economic relations and a projection of political cooperation at a certain level. Although there has been tensions, we have seen it in a way that it's not affecting structurally their foreign policy making or bilateral cooperation. This is also related to the fact that Turkish intelligence service and foreign ministry under Hakan Fidan, he had a big file of Iraq and security in the border. So this was his task since his early days of his career. So we have seen this strongly managed by both parties, despite having negotiations over certain issues. But when it comes to recent message from Öcalan, what we heard from the Iraqi side, the Iraqi Kurds, they said they are supporting, of course, a peace process in Turkey, but they have a reservation over the sovereignty and their role when it comes to managing the territory under their rule, which is perfectly understandable. And there are some villages which have been ruled by PKK in the north of Iraq, and this also somehow damaged the authority of Erbil over their land. This is why there's a common security understanding, but this doesn't mean that they won't have any other issues regarding the solution of PKK in the borders of Iraq or any other security arrangement. What we see intentionally done here, the purpose is not to have a structural problem over the security and having always a window to have negotiations between Erbil and Ankara, and to not have a security issue or an issue that might bring further tension to their relationship over PKK, because this might affect not only the border security of the parties, but also their plans over development road project. And we have to remember that KRG is looking for further regional engagements, not only with Turkey, but with other parties. They have established new diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. They are exporting other local products other than oil. So what we see from the KRG's perspective, they are relocating themselves as a regional actor, kind of underlining their actorness in the Iraqi politics rather than keeping their politics over an identity problem or identity negotiation with the central government. So this is why I believe their connection to Turkey might bring further consolidation of their regional engagement if they use this chance, as both parties, Turkey and KRG, to use the advantages they have rather than focusing on the security issues or issues that they have to deal in long term.
Hamza, I want to ask you a little more Trump-specific question. I know I asked you about the U.S. before, but when we look at Trump's domestic policies, especially regarding oil, his drill baby drill position, obviously he wants to see U.S. oil and LNG play a more significant role in international markets. And we're also seeing steps taken to at least de-escalate the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, which could probably also have an impact on driving oil prices even lower. Now, when you have this major pipeline opening up, it's probably going to drive oil prices even lower. For a country that wants to start drilling, isn't that kind of against what they want? Wouldn't they want to see higher prices? And also, if Trump decides to withdraw from northeastern Syria. How would that impact the situation? How would a decreasing presence impact? I know you said more expectation from the Turks and the Iraqis, but obviously less of a presence in Syria. What would that mean?
Well, if oil is resumed in northern Iraq, then that will still be taken part of Iraq's quota that they have to abide by as being an OPEC member. So I'm not entirely quite sure as how it will impact global oil prices by having, if it will have necessarily more oil on the market. So that still remains to be seen. However, I don't know if there's a lot of interest from the current American administration in wanting to be present in northern Syria or in Iraq, and we're going to see in the coming days whether the Trump administration will abide by the security agreement that the Biden administration signed with the Iraqi government late last year. That will eventually see troops withdrawal by the end of 2025 in most of Iraq and by all of Iraq at the end of 2026. Because, you know, ever since the war in Palestine, in Lebanon, the regime change in Syria, you know, it's the U.S. might not necessarily want to have a presence in Iraq, but Iraqi officials may want to rethink how they want to have that security agreement. They might see it as a offer against others by maintaining U.S. troops. So the role, and the United States obviously is their number one decision maker here, but that doesn't mean that Iraqi officials aren't rethinking this arrangement that they have.
Afzal, I want to specifically ask you about Iran because it's a country that had probably big plans and could have played a big role in what's happening in the region 6 months ago. Not to say that it still can't, but definitely a diminished presence compared to a year ago. When we look at what's happening in Syria, when we look at the possibility of maximum pressure returning, spats between Turkey and Iran, a lot of tension between Israel and Iran. It's looking at this pipeline possibly reopening the development road project, possibly opening up very, very soon as well. Turkey gaining more influence in Iraq. How do you see the Iran-Iraq relationship, the Iran-Turkey relationship going forward?
Well, you've described some of the complexities, but I just want to add some more, just to make the question, I think, a bit more realistic. Because, as you said, yes, in many ways, Iran's influence has declined in recent weeks and months. But at the same time, we've had a strategic relationship agreement between Iran and Russia, the details of which, of course, are not public. So it has aligned itself with Russia on some fronts, and one can assume that it would include energy as part of any strategic relationship. And so the question, of course, is how will Iran's future affect Russia, and how will Russia be involved in any further attacks on Iran? And then, of course, that is even more complicated with the fact that under the current administration, Russia seems to have a great deal of influence over the United States. So the United States seems to have a great deal of interest in preserving, to some degree, Russian interests. And of course, they link to Iran. So I think the situation is somewhat complex, and what we're living in is the opposite of what we saw in the Cold War, where alliances in the form of NATO and USSR were self-sustaining and stable, and indeed even strengthened over time. We're seeing the emergence of these relationships, which are often ignored in the Western world. This strategic agreement between Russia and Iran has been virtually ignored. It's not considered of relevance, but of course it is far more relevant than most people realize.
Betul, Hamza, Afzal, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining me. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.